Are we talking about that on this on this
Yeah,
podcast?
exactly. Well, that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of people would be like, this insert sucks. Hey everyone, this is Jack from the Cardboard Herald, and two quick things before we get into our top 10 greatest inserts of all time, 5 each from myself and guest co-host Jennifer Graham-Macht. Now, first off, Jennifer is of Keymaster Games, which you may be familiar with from being the publisher of Parks, which has just about as amazing of an insert as can possibly be, which makes Jennifer an ideal subject matter expert to have for this conversation. But we decided, in all fairness, to disqualify Parks from consideration on the top of our list. But if you want a real good insert, you should probably check that out. Second thing is that this is a long one. I mean, you get it. You're looking at the time count below going like, Jack, I see that. It's long. What's up with this? Well, the thing is that Jennifer brings that great expertise and publisher perspective that allowed us to talk about so many interesting things in relation to inserts that are both from the gamer end user perspective and the publisher perspective, like accounting for sleeves, accounting for future content, the cost of production on these things. And I think that this is well worth keeping the full spectrum of discussion included in the video. That said, we did have a pretty lengthy intro discussion about, one, the inspiration for this list, which was actually kind of a funny story, and two, some of the challenges that went into us putting our respective lists together. If you want that full shebang, all of it is going to be available in the podcast version of this that's going up on the podcast channel as soon as this goes up on the video channel, and we'll have links below. But for now, we're just going to get straight into going back and forth on our top 10s greatest inserts of all time with myself and guest co-host Jennifer Graham-Macht of Keymaster Games. Enjoy the show. Jennifer, why don't you take us away with your number 5 on your list?
My number 5 on my list is Dice Throne Season 2.
Ooh, I like it.
Yeah. These aren't, I won't say that these are like in like definitive order, but I would put, this is not like a hard and fast, like the number 1 is like solidly my number 1, because that would be like really, really, really hard.
It's
like
not going to be written on your grave.
Right. I'm not, that's not a hill I'm dying on. Dice Throne Season 2, what they did, and they ended up going back and they liked it so much, they went back and repackaged Season 1 to do the same thing, because they basically were like, yeah, this is a way better experience than than what original Season 1 is. And it was the right decision. I think it was the right decision. I actually didn't get the repackaged Season 1, and I was like, I kind of wish I got the repackaged Season 1. So each character, Dice Throne, if you don't know, is a dueling game, a dice dueling game, a Yahtzee style with asymmetric characters that have really interesting abilities and abilities that you can upgrade along the way. And it's just a dueling game. You're just trying to knock out your opponent. You can play it at more than 2 players, but it is an excellent 2-player experience. So it definitely has high marks in my household. What I like this high level, this is that usability thing, is that your personal stuff comes in a package. So you have smaller boxes,
right?
Which they did so that they could sort of improve the like reduce the barrier to the accessibility of the game. Instead of having to buy into a group of 6 characters, you could just be like, hey, if you just want 2, here's this smaller package that you can grab and just do it 1 versus 1, a head-to-head battle. So you open up that box, and then there's 2 trays. And I guess we should just get game trays out of the way now. Just have that quick conversation
exactly,
right now, right?
Exactly.
Whether you like it, know it or not, game trays has become a leader in developing inserts. So it makes it onto the list several times in several different places. And it's interesting to me that there's no real competitor for them at this point. But so they developed these trays, and it's just a personal, like your personal things, everything you need to play Dice Throne comes in a little package that you just take out of the box, hand to the person. And even from there, like it's snapped, so nothing's ever going to get disheveled. It's got a snap lid, so you can't get, tossed around or anything like that. And then you unpackage it, and it's like, even from like the top down, the way you unpack and get into your personal box matches how you would want to set up your gameplay area.
It just prepares you right away to play. You don't have to deal with excess components like that. That's a big part of it to me, is that by sectoring it out into the individual boxes or tubs, that you don't have to deal with like all of the setup involved in a full player count game, or all of the components that are irrelevant to your character, which is a huge boon. Like one of the complaints about board games for a lot of people is the time that it takes in order to play. And if you get set up and takedown to be easier and more efficient and less overwhelming, then not only are you more mentally prepared for playing, but you're taking up less time in order to do it.
Yeah. And maybe Dice Throne is already well set up for this, because there's no central board. There are no central components that you're having to manage. You're not like giving somebody like universal control of that thing. And so that aids to it. And that's sort of like out of the purview of what we're talking about, but it's definitely relevant to say, hey, this was already uniquely positioned to be a great experience. But it's important that Roxley recognized that and leaned into it, and like recognized the opportunity to make that setup experience so simple, because they want their game, like it's a Yahtzee style game. There's zero reason for Dice Throne is a great gateway step above gateway experience for gaming, and it's an awesome game to throw out on the table. It's really accessible for kids, so just like increasing the potential for a game to get on the table because of ease of use in that way made it a huge plus for me.
Well, my number 5, and this is a completely different perspective than yours, is Five Tribes. And the reason why Five Tribes is in this is actually related to another game. When I first started getting into modern tabletop games, I played the Catans, and I played a few other games that were available, but I was blown away by Small World. And Small World was like the first time where I saw everything having a relatively meticulous place within the box, or comparatively to other games. And so Days of Wonder made a really big impression on me just from opening up that box and seeing the treasure trove within. You had the removable little tubs that had all the different cardboard tokens for all the different characters. As I played it more, I realized that there were little annoying bits, that things didn't just quite fit in, or I wish they'd done something differently. But there was like a recapitulation of this experience that I had when I got Five Tribes. And it combines two of the aspects that I really like in an insert. One, it has all the different spots for the different like Citadel player pieces and all the different cards. The gins go in a specific area and everything doesn't float around and go crazy. But there is a basin, like an open area to the side as well, that is just much more flexible for what have you that can go in there. Now, some people are going to complain about a game that doesn't forward think to account for expansions. And yes, if you are going to get the Artisans of Nicala, or the expansion that looks like Paul McCartney is on the front of the box, then you're going to have additional towers that don't fit alongside the original set of towers that are in there. But the freedom and flexibility of that central basin allows you to get everything successfully into the box, and the lid closes. That's something where I have been able to get it all in there, keep it organized, and still have that beautiful presentation of when you open it, feeling like it was specifically designed for this game in a really smart way. So this one is partly sentimental, but it's also that sentimentality that I kind of judge future board game expansions based on, so I had to have it on the list.
Yep. So I went back and before this, and I looked up dates. I wanted to know the dates of all of our polls. So Five Tribes is actually the oldest game old,
Yeah,
at a whopping 6 years old. It's now in first grade. Is the oldest game on our list, which I thought was really interesting. Because I was just curious. I was like, I wonder, like I felt like I was trying to pull back when I thought, like I really thought, and then I looked at my list and I was like, I really haven't gone very far back at all, have I? Like,
well,
or is it just that that's how much we've really sat down and as an industry, as publishers, as manufacturers, really thought about saying, hey, this is a priority and an opportunity for us to improve experiences in this hobby, and part of in that vein, make gaming more accessible, approachable for other people.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like, when I think about board games from my childhood, and not just the classic Monopoly and Risk and all that kind of stuff, but even games like Hero Quest and Dragon Strike and everything, when my brother and I got done playing those, we just jammed everything back into the box. And it was a nightmare every time that we took it out in order to get everything set up in the way that it should be. And that was a huge part of the time commitment, and also something that would sometimes discourage us from playing. You sometimes open a box and just look at the mess of components within it, and you're like, you know what? On second thought, let's just play some Parks.
Yeah. That's making me think about that. I'm remembering I had an anniversary edition of Risk, and it was the first metal edition, metal components edition of the game. And in that edition, that was the very first game that I had that had bags in it, cinch bags for your army. And it was that velvety finish bags. It's still big picture. They're still relatively cheap, right? We're just still talking about this. But it made me care about the things that were in the box. I coveted that game. I coveted those pieces. Every time I took them out, like I cared about like organizing them and making my army rows and columns, very neat and making it look very sophisticated, because it felt like a sophisticated experience. Like that plays a part into that care.
Right. If it feels like a prestigious thing relative to whatever price it is, that's going to make you treat it as a prestigious thing, as something that's worth investing your time in and thinking more about, like, well, what else could I do? Like, that's actually a big springboard for a lot of creativity on the gamer side of the hobby, is people saying, well, this was a good start, but how can I develop something with my 3D printer or foam core or all these other offshoots that people do as like crafts at home that are incredible? And I think a lot of that is inspired by the starts that even early games like a really nice edition of Risk would have kind of given them the push out the door on that.
Yeah. And I want to, you brought up something really interesting that I before we move on with Five Tribes, that I wanted to call out, which was this idea or this notion that a game box should be forward thinking for expansions, and how much that idea comes from really a minority of the population. That is, like, as a publisher, the drop-off rate between who buys games and who buys expansions, no matter how popular the expansion, and I'll say I'm very excited about Nightfall, and Nightfall's been doing really wonderfully for us. Like, it's been really awesome to see people getting Nightfall and loving Nightfall, but the drop-off rate is still substantial. So making a box with an insert that is like, you open up and then like you've organized all the things, you've got card components, and then there's just emptiness in the box, and you're like, I wonder what that's supposed to be for. That's not a good experience for a person to feel this emptiness there. As much as like we have this desire to want things to fit inside of a box and be compact. Absolutely, I have that desire, but I'm not sure that's this specific experience that we want the majority of people to have.
Right, and it's a double-edged sword, right? If you open a game and there's room for an expansion in there, then your first thought might be like, well, why wasn't the expansion included? If you already know what the expansion is and you're already accounting for it as part of the overall experience in playing this game, then should that have been part of the base game? Or if you're the type of person who likes the base game and never wants an expansion, it's going to feel like a bunch of wasted space, and potentially, that's wasted shelf space that you have. It's a waste of materials in extending the box, extending the actual insert itself. That's additional carbon footprint that's being put into something that you never are going to see the utility for if you don't buy the expansion. So I totally understand why some people are like, why doesn't this account for all the future stuff? But I'm with you on this one. So what's going to be your number 4 here, Jen?
So my number 4 is going to be number 9. I know it's a play on words there. But number 9 is one of the older. This is where I thought that I was reaching back far. It turns out I wasn't really reaching back that far. This is a 2017 game. And number 9 is probably the least assuming game on my list.
Right.
But this was one of those, like, surprisingly made it onto my list, like totally didn't expect it to. But when I looked at it again, I was like, number 9 is an incredibly simple game. And the insert sits in the box. Like, so number 9 is just a bunch of numbers, and it's just a spatial game that you're trying to play, and it accounts for pieces for 4 total people to play inside of a box, but it's basically infinitely expandable. But because of the nature of the game is just this rule book and these stacks of numbers, and the insert is just the cold press. What is that press called? Fitting, of the pieces of each of the numbers into their spots, and it's thick enough for all the components for each player for each number to fit nicely and smoothly, so they're evenly on top and they have finger holes around them. No, it's not the nicest plastic. It's a relatively cheap plastic, but this insert is not an insert that I ever want to take out of the box. I guess there's a deck of cards. I think you flip over cards to get to what number you're pulling.
Sure.
So there's one other thing that should come out, but that's just a deck of cards. You take it out, you put it on the table, and you can put it right next to this box. So I realized that this insert doesn't need to come out. The pieces don't need to come out. It's really easy to grab your number as it's flipped over. And it becomes this super functional. Like when you were talking about Dune Imperium, I was like, this might be my Dune Imperium.
Yeah.
Where it's like just like the most basic thing, but I realized I super appreciate that it can just, like, you literally take the lid off the box, put the box in the middle of the table, shuffle cards, put it right next to it, and go. And it didn't need anything else, and they just did that in a great way.
Well, that actually dovetails into my next one, which is a dark horse contender that just changed. I hate to tell you this, but the potential spoiler that we had earlier was for Raccoon Tycoon. And Raccoon Tycoon is an honorable mention in here because it's an example of where that expansion comes, where the expansion has the box in order to account for the base game. So now if you're getting the expansion, hey, you have one nice box where everything goes into it, and the Fat Cat expansion it is a Fat Cat expansion. It is bananas how much is in there, but it also has room to integrate everything from the base game into it, so you have that one nice consolidated thing. But I've moved it over to honorable mention because I cannot get away with this list without bringing up Haba's Dragon's Breath. This is a kid's game, but first off, I think it's a great game for kids and adults alike. It's a great game that teaches speculation, and you're dealing with all these wonderful gems and like these shower curtain rings, which are great. But it's the integration of the insert as functional component in the game that is so wonderful. There's a central board, and that board rests on top of this subdivided, almost like hashtag looking insert. You lift up the board, and then inside you can organize your components so everything's nice and neat. But then you put the board back down after you've taken things out, and it has these reservoirs, I guess, in the inside, where you are going to shift these tokens to either the tokens that you've collected as part of playing, or the tokens that fell as part of the dexterity component of the game. And it's so concise and well thought out, and the fact that what keeps your things organized on the shelf are also the things that are going to keep you organized in a completely different way as you play is such a cool idea, and such a synergy of function and elegance and just everything that I love about tabletop games. And so I'm sorry, Raccoon Tycoon, but Dragon's Breath came in and just, took your number 4 spot from me.
That's such a great call out, because that totally reminds, and it's very unassuming. You're totally right that you open up that box and it's just there and it's ready to go, and they haven't used the most lavish of components or anything like that, because Haba is not trying to up that market price, right? Like, they do a great job of staying in this like price bracket, and they just have that on lockdown, and they did a great job of making a super dynamic game experience that as adults love just as much as kids.
Yeah, that game is awesome. Well, I guess we'll shift over to what's on number 3. What you got going on?
So my number 3 is Pandemic Legacy Season 1.
This was almost on my list, and I disqualified it because I was like, well, I got rid of Pandemic, or Legacy Season 1. I didn't hold on to it afterwards, and then it's complicated to think about Pandemic Legacy post playing it as like this shelf hog, and then you're like, it's this wasted space and everything. But it nearly was on my list, so I was actually really excited that it was on your list.
Yeah, I this was a I think the breadth. I think what I love about the list is, maybe the most, is the breadth of gaming style, gaming types that exist on the list. And as I was thinking about it, I was like, you know what? Legacy games literally cannot function without a really finely detailed, well thought out box presentation.
Totally.
And I think that I would generally say that every I'm using Pandemic Legacy Season 1 because I think I guess before Risk Legacy, which I haven't experienced. Like, I haven't played that one. I've seen pictures of it, but I haven't played that one. So I didn't necessarily want it. So I'm adding it on the list as like my first experience that I thought was a well done game. Again, we're not talking about like excessively expensive component quality, material quality, but it's still fun.
Right.
It's fun to look in that box and see the yellow tape, which Risk Legacy also does. They do that taping sort of thing as well. And I think they even have taped envelopes on their lid or something like that, or right. So like it's fun and engaging to look at, and then there's plenty of warning signs, but like how you organize boxes and how you label them, and make it interesting to look at, but also functionally allow for game setup without overdoing it. I'll say that I'll call out Sleeping Gods, and I don't want to be on this podcast and be like naysay Sleeping Gods, because I want to preface this and say we are absolutely having a great time with Sleeping Gods. So asterisk, super great time with Sleeping Gods. Set up for, and it's not exactly a legacy game, but it's kind of along those lines, right? Yeah. The setup and the organization that needs to happen when you open Sleeping Gods is a big miss for me. I was a little, now that we're in it, it's great, but that moment was a little bit of a hurdle. And that is not something that you experience with, now the first time you play a legacy game, it doesn't matter. It's going to be a challenge to understand what's going on.
Right.
But I think they just did an excellent job with managing how things are labeled and how you can go to access things and find things through the rules, and like making the rule book and the box compatible, and building that system and improving that system along the way.
Yeah, exactly. That's the most interesting thing about it to me. I mean, absolutely, yes. The ability to keep clandestine items, secret until they're revealed is imperative in the design of the insert and the packaging within the game. But as I recall, my 2 times going through Season 1 and my 1 time going through Season 2, and well, I haven't actually opened Legacy Season 0. It's on the shelf right now, but I'm waiting for all of my pandemic group to be vaccinated in order for us to hit that one to the table. But as you play, you develop the organization for the new components that come in, and you can repurpose a lot of the tubs and trays and things in order to develop your own system. Mm-hmm. But I never once felt like, now that this new element has been introduced, it's out of control. Like, we don't have a way of accounting for this. And even if the tub itself isn't holding the contents that were secret within it when we started, it still was part of the process, and part of the fun of the game was feeling like, okay, we've opened this now. How are we going to integrate this into all the tools that we have here? How are we going to preserve all of our torn apart cards and trashed items and that kind of stuff? Like, I'm totally with you on here. It is integral to that experience, and they knocked it out of the park.
Yeah. What about you? What's your number 3?
Well, my number 3 is a game that I think this is where we could say that some people are going to take umbrage with this, and that's Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. So the reason why I think this may be a problematic pick for some reasons is that when I originally reviewed the game shortly before it came out, and then the discussion that I saw happening on like Reddit the day that it came out was a lot of people saying like, how the hell do we get this all back in the box? And the insert looks beautiful. It's one of those ones where it's like, this looks great, and like everything should have a place, and then suddenly it doesn't work in an intuitive way. So I just sat down and was like, okay, I'll just make a quick video how to organize Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, because my group had some experience with it at this point. We played through over half of the campaign by the time that the game came out, and we had developed our system, which worked with all the components there. We didn't have any added elements. We just had more time to figure out what is the intent of this insert. There's some mystery involved, and how do we make this work? That video, I think, is at the moment my second watched video on the Cardboard Herald, and it took me about 20 minutes to do, and was some of the laziest editing that I'd ever done. So clearly, a lot of people do not feel that this is an intuitive insert by any means. But to me, it's the initial presentation when you open up the box, and just everything as it's originally presented has its wonderful place, and it's mysterious, and the different characters and the different minis and the things that you're not allowed to look at until later on. It just presents in such a great way, and it's functional once you know how to harness the powers of that insert. There is a degree of sacrifice that I think a lot of people aren't big fans of. I think if you sleeve your cards, it's not going to work for you.
Are we talking about that on this podcast?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of people would be like, this insert sucks, is because if it doesn't account for sleeves, then they don't want to hear about it. But you know what? You're the minority.
Here's a fun fact. I'll say this here. I'll share this detail here on our Nightfall memory. Side note. No, sorry. During our Nightfall campaign, because we hear about people love Parks, they love the artwork on it, and they want to protect it, and I totally understand that, and I'm like, when I say that we are using high quality components, it's with that in mind, because we love it too. Always questions about sleeving, and about it fitting in the game, which it doesn't. Right. Cards do not fit in the insert to Parks or Nightfall. They don't fit. And so we took a survey, and of the people that responded, and it was a good sample size, less than 10% of people who responded said that they sleeved or cared about sleeving their cards or would consider sleeving their cards. Less than 10% is not the right reason to make an insert like that. That was our audience, and yes, that could totally be different for a different game. I absolutely can concede that 100%. Audience makeups might be different for specific types of games, but in our case, it was not. It was a good reminder to us that sleeving is a hobbyist mentality. It is very much a hobbyist mentality. And it's not even like the whole hobby. It's a segment of the hobby.
Right.
Fact.
But, the squeaky wheels, they're the ones out there sometimes talking the loudest. But let me put it this way. Lords of Waterdeep is a game that I've played a bajillion times. It's one of my wife and I's favorite games. And so from the time we originally got it till the time that we have it now, we have played it a ton. And we've never sleeved it. And I know this is just me. I do like protecting games, but I like being careful. But actually the weathering on it over the past, 8 years since it released, maybe 9 years since it released, is a big part of the character, from the meeples on them to the cards themselves starting to show a little bit of wear. We're careful with them, but inevitably over time, over 50, 60, 70 plays, then it's going to have some of that. My personal opinion is that if you have gotten 100 plays out of something and you're like, oh my god, if I had only sleeved this, I would have been able to get 500 plays out of it, you've kind of gotten your money's worth. I mean, you might at that time maybe get a new edition of it. Sometimes sleeves are really expensive on their own.
Right. Well, that's a good segue back to Gloomhaven, because this is Jaws of the Lion, but I'm so curious. Like, do you feel like the insert in Jaws of the Lion is like a direct like feedback loop with original Gloomhaven, where I bought Gloomhaven and I bought fish tackle boxes.
Exactly.
I had to.
I think it is a direct response to criticisms of Gloomhaven, and I think that of the entire game as a whole. Like, Jaws of the Lion is not just Gloomhaven for babies. That's not what it is. What it is looking at what are the real problematic elements of Gloomhaven and how do we address that in this new edition. And it's not meant as a replacement, but it is meant as kind of like a pathway. This is the starter path for you wrapping your brain around Gloomhaven in the first place, whether it's the tutorialization of it, it's the far more limited scope, it's the map that is done on the spiral-bound notebooks that can be put together instead of having this bananas amount of tiles there.
Tiles for days. And, like, how do you get them to stack? Like, stacking tiles in Gloomhaven OG to get them just the right, because, we're on really, there's a very finite amount of space that they can fit in, and they have to fit there. And I know I can get them to fit there, but I always have to remember how I'm supposed to stack them to make it fit.
So to me, Jaws of the Lion, from the design approach to the usability of the maps versus the map tiles to the insert itself, is a direct response to how to make the experience of playing Gloomhaven better. And I'm really hoping that from the insert to the maps to everything else, that they take the success and recognition that Jaws of the Lion got and utilize that in the future Gloomhaven releases. So, you know what? If you got beef with me, come at me, world. Jaws of the Lion is my number 3.
Nice.
Climbing up the list. Where are you at, Jennifer?
All right, my number 2, it sneaks into the list as you said it in the conversation. It might be cheating, but I don't care. It is Wingspan.
Nice.
Wingspan does technically have an insert in it for the cards, which I will actually say is my least favorite part of Wingspan. As much as I love the tray, the fact that it can display the bird cards, I think that part is excellent. But that tray is actually, to me, a concession toward sleevers and toward sleeving that creates so much pocket space and air that the cards moving around in there have a lot of potential to get damaged for us that don't want to, with expansions, sleeve I don't even know. I have 500 cards.
It's
I think
ridiculous, and there's more coming every day.
And there's more coming. I'm not sleeving my Wingspan. I'm not sleeving my Wingspan. And I do sleeve cards. I will say that I do sleeve some of my games. I specifically sleeve the games that don't use good card stock in them. And I kind of like do it begrudgingly. I'm like, you're lucky this game is so good that I spent all this extra money on these sleeves.
Yep.
Because I'm a snob, of course, and I'm buying expensive sleeves.
Yeah. Sleeve fluff, the extra, little sluff on the side when it doesn't fit perfectly. Isn't that maddening to you?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't want to pull out sleeves and they're bent, so I totally get it. You don't want to like try to stuff it in there, and then that's why people trash inserts. I get it. So Wingspan makes it onto my list because of box mapping.
Mm-hmm.
Box mapping in Parks was actually inspired by partially inspired by that. It was something that we had in mind, and I was like, this is a good idea. And then they Maddox, when he was making the wraparound, did it. Box mapping on the side of the box, I think, is so excellent because it basically Wingspan removes all inserts. There is this, if we're going to call that an insert, I guess we can. I don't really consider the card carrier an insert. It kind of is, but I don't really consider it that. I just consider it a component for the game, like a thing that you do. It's an empty box, and that he's just organized the components and teaching you, Stonemeyer's teaching you how to organize the components in a way to make the box super functional without any added extra fluff materials in it. Mm-hmm. And I think that is excellent. And even with inserts, I think more like I think that's a valuable addition to boxes. Mm-hmm. For this reason, like you're talking about Jaws of the Lion. Imagine a map on the side of Jaws of the Lion that is just a simple put away map. I don't know, because I don't know how like functionally relevant that is there.
Jennifer, this is my second highest watched video you were talking about here. So you tried to take away my livelihood? Is that what's happening here?
What I'm commenting on is how fortunate for you that they didn't put a box map on the side of it, so that we could be here to talk about it today. I think you just need to hashtag Jaws of the Lion insert again in the title of this video, and then
yeah, exactly. Get some clicks. That's what it's all about. But as far as Wingspan, if we think about what is the intent of an insert, it's to protect your components, keep things organized, and make it easier for you to play. Then mm-hmm. having no insert is yet everything fit together perfectly in the way that an insert is supposed to serve in other games is perfect. That's the best insert for that game.
Right. Where it becomes intuitive. And yes, like there's there's little pouches. I forget what Stonemeyer calls them. They're containers. They're specialty container
the that is just a tubs.
Yeah, that you pop open and becomes two little dispensers for materials. So these are things that just pop out and open up very easily onto the table and become places, good compartments for tokens. They get used all the time. We love them. So yes, maybe like those aren't, again, they could be considered inserts. I don't necessarily consider those inserts, but because of those integrated and useful, functional, again, we're circling back on, turns out that function is like a high priority here. That functionality mixed with just good box organization and spatial organization is perfectly eloquent. Now, has that box, do I use that anymore because I have the expansions now? No, I've developed a new box mapping system while I wait for, like everybody else, very patiently for the big box. And I'm very excited for that, and I will for sure use it. So yes, that's changed since that box map, but as a like base game, core game setup, I think it's excellent.
Hashtag big box. We need to have Patrick Leader come on here and once again be held to the coals over
That's
the
right. Held
lack
to
of
fire.
exactly over the lack of root big box announcements.
Yes. Stop making expansions, Patrick. Instead, make a big box.
Exactly. We want a big box. I want to hold everything. I want it to be a locker-sized box. I want my playmats to be able to fit in there.
There you
So
go.
for my number 2, speaking of leader games at least, is tangentially related in that this is a Whirligig Games release. This is Pax Pamir 2nd Edition, which I think is kind of the refinement of everything that I liked originally about inserts. This isn't an overly meticulous one, but it's similar to that experience with Small World and with Five Tribes that I was talking about earlier, where you open the box and just it looks like a feast as soon as you open it. It's so well thought out, and yet at the same time it's very minimalistic. There's open areas for you to put the player tokens in little bags, and then there's a little tub in order to fit some of the other tokens which are going to be put on the boards. What I love is there's a nice specifically allocated amount of space for the cloth map that you roll up, and it just looks so beautiful in there. And then it has those, whatever they are, clay tokens. I don't know what the player pieces are made out of, but those are in their own specific space that can be removed and put next to you on the table and used as you play, which works beautifully. Now, this, I think, is in part in relationship to the tokens themselves, because the insert is serving in some ways as a showcase of the tokens.
Mm-hmm.
And so it feels very old school in a way. Like it almost looks like a beautiful chess set that, you know, your grandparent might have had.
Yes.
Or something. You open and you're like, wow, this looks like a one of a kind thing. Of course, it's a mass market game, but opening it up feels so wonderful. You have enough freedom that you don't feel overly confined, especially if it's a game that you want to add more components to. I know a lot of people feel like the games that already look really lovely, they want to, you know, interject some love into it by further upgrading.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it stays organized, it stays clean, and it just feels like it's a through line with the act of playing the game that's so elegant, and the packaging and presentation itself. So Pax Pamir 2nd Edition, when I think of good inserts, was one that first jumped to mind.
Yeah, that is on your list, the game that was almost on my list. It's that's the mine. Your pandemic is Pax Pamir. I love that comparison to chess sets. That idea that like you open the, like sometimes you just open the box and look into it, and you've got this display case for those tokens. I think they're like an MC or something, or like a type of resin. I should know this because we've been sampling them for something. No comment. And I don't remember what the designation is for what type of material that is right now, but they are so nice to look at, and it totally shows off in a very simple way just by having a clear overlay on top of it, those pieces, while keeping them functionally safe. And they're very square, you know, like they're not strange shapes so that like they could roll around, or there's like a ton of form fitting that needs to happen. They're essentially just rectangles that you know, can uniformly stack together or sit together very neatly. So I totally appreciate that. And that plastic, because there's just a clear plastic overlay that goes on it, right? That slips right on top of it, specifically of that section.
Yeah.
And that reminds me of honorable mention. I'll just call it out like broadly, is the Vito Lacerda Eagle Griffin big box games. They do that a lot, and that's their like non game trays, right? Like their non-game trays take on that, but those are like those super functional, just like they're not clipping in or clicking in any way, but they just slip on top of something and become displays for games with beautiful components in them.
Nothing about this list is concise. We're spending an hour talking about 10 inserts here. So I don't feel bad about asking this quick tangent. We're not haters. We're not going to, call out games more than you already have. I mean, Sleeping Gods is in the corner crying. But
I'm really sorry.
did you have an easier time coming up with really bad inserts, even inserts that look or seem like they should be really good inserts, but were actually bad, or were just examples of garbage thought put into just throwing games into the box?
You know what I think the big takeaway for me was, is as I was looking at my shelf and thinking, is I was going through games that I love, and I was sort of being like, I would go and I'd be like, no.
Yep. Yeah.
No. And like it wasn't so much that there was any like true vitriol against them, more so a sense of disappointment or at the potential for games to do just a little bit better.
Right.
And being like, wow, yes, maybe in the big scheme of things, the insert, that box experience isn't playing this huge role in terms of my impact and enjoyment, because I do try to just keep games on my shelf that we really want to play and care about. But more so that it was sort of this, like, I was able to go through my shelf and know how I felt about those inserts. Like I had a definitive, like, I knew which ones I have good experiences with when I open and which ones I don't. So like whether it's subconscious or not, it does matter.
Totally. Yeah. It makes a big impact. And like you said, that disappointment, like, you're one of my favorite games. Why couldn't you have done better here?
Right.
Yep. All right. Well, then let's take it to your number one. What do you got?
Well, in that spirit of knowing, my number one is based on me having an instantly positive reaction to an insert, and that is Wasteland Express Delivery Service.
Good pick.
I believe that it was my first game with a game trays insert in it. Because I also believe that it's an early, if not the first. I don't know that definitively, but I do think it's an early game trays work commission. But no matter what, I feel like everything to me has sort of built around and built off of Wasteland Express. Like I was thinking about and considering the new Tricurion edition, and I was like, I could do that, but I really feel like that's just based on Wasteland Express.
Yeah.
That idea that what they iterate, they're just iterating on, and maybe Tricurion is a better insert. I don't know, but if we go back to my number 5, which was Dice Throne, and it was about that personal experience. Wasteland at a very early, 2017, way long time ago, was one, making a ton of game fit into a really compact space. It's still a fairly big box, but 2, making a game with universal components very easy to set up and very user friendly. There's the mod shop in it that is super easy to pass around. You have those personal components for your personal player. There's spaces for cards. So the game setup is like tray out on the table. And then there's some box mapping where you just put the trays back in really easily and they nest really nicely together so that you can truly flip box over on purpose or on accident and everything is totally fine. And that includes a ton of tiles, like going back there. Here we go. Gloomhaven, lots of tiles. Yep. You know what? Wasteland has a lot of tiles in it, and I don't feel as bad about game setup as I do with Gloomhaven.
Right. And with Gloomhaven, it's not just the game setup. There's the knowledge that you're going to have to spend the time putting it away, and even that can be a deterrent. And so, yeah, the things that you're talking about, that feeling of just less stress involved as you're playing it. And you mentioned the ability to flip it upside down. How many inserts or just games in general do you have on your shelf where you could flip them upside down and it was supposed to stay together, but suddenly it is all awry in there?
It was marketed to me that way.
Yep. Well,
That's mine. What is yours?
my number one is Eclipse Second Dawn, and there's or Second Dawn for the Galaxy. There's a lot of reasons for this, but the thing that I think I most wanted to highlight is how much of a functionality improvement it is over the original Eclipse experience, which Eclipse to me was an incredibly innovative game at the time that it came out, but it was also, it kind of felt bare bones from an artistic perspective, from the component quality perspective. It felt like it was kind of, we have this really good idea and it involves a lot, but we really can't commit a lot to it because of, various reasons. And now, nearly a decade after the original came out, this beautiful new edition is here.
Incredibly, like, meticulous and absolutely stunning.
Yeah. It's another one of those things where it looks like a feast when you open it. And the functionality that I'm talking about here is that, just like you were highlighting with Wasteland Express and with Dice Throne, you remove a tub, which would be an insert for a whole other game on its own, but it's a personal insert in the case of Eclipse. You have this tub which is color coded to the player pieces, and on top it has inlaid spaces for you to keep track of all of the various resources. So if it gets bumped, it's not going to go sliding everywhere in the way the original would have, where you were keeping track of it on a cardboard mat. But in this one, you open up that tub, and within it is organized components for everything that you personally are going to use to play the game. And then underneath all 6 of the different faction tubs that you remove is a beautifully sculpted insert to contain all of the shared components for the game. That's all of the tiles that populate the center map. It has all of the NPC tiles. And further on, you have like upgrade tiles that are a big part of this game. A huge aspect of what makes Eclipse cool is that you're organically upgrading all of your different technological capabilities that influence your ship's ability to do combat, their movement, but also your personal ability to like have economic growth, and exploration is modified through all these different upgrades. And these tiles are, they're a mess in the original, but in this, it's so well thought out and organized and presented, and it could just be put on the table, easily accessed, and relatively, for the size of game, easily put back into them. It has just completely transformed what is the absolute worst aspect of this game and made it this beautiful, premium, extremely well thought out experience. And my instinct when I originally saw that was like, well, that's got to be like the super nice upgrade version. And no, it's the stock version. Every copy of Eclipse from now on will have this in it. And yes, you could argue that has probably increased the price. The retail price of the game is pretty high, but at the same time, if that's the game that you want to play, they give you so many good tools in order to play it. I was blown away. And to me, that is the pinnacle of that game trays experience of how do we have this elegance and functionality.
Absolutely. When I saw that at the top of your list, I was like, yeah, that makes total sense. It's like it was like angelic almost to look at it on Kickstarter. I don't know if we can call game inserts like that, but if we could, that's totally it. Maybe it does make things more expensive, but that criticism comes up a lot. And at the end of the day, this is about having a great time, and it's about presenting the best experience. So for, this is a push and pull, a tug, and there's no, hard and fast right or wrong answer here, but pushing in favor of more expensive for something that's going to result in a game getting on the table more easily, more quickly, more frequently, is always going to be a plus in my book. If I can make that, especially a game like Eclipse, that is so fun. Like I don't have a bad experience memory playing Eclipse. I just don't.
Totally.
But you're right. The only thing is like, okay, somebody needs to get here for the original one to set this game up an hour before whenever that's going to happen, because like you just don't want people to have to deal with that part of the experience. So someone just like sacrifices themselves to the setup and is like, I'll do it. I'll be the bigger person here and do this setup.
And if you didn't have those organizational tools, every person who I know who owns Eclipse has gone out and got organizational tools for themselves. And so the fact that it is custom made for this game and integrated into it in such a nice way that it all feels intuitive, like you don't have that real complicated feeling of like, do I have to Tetris this back together? Where do things go? Like I have some collector's editions of games, like I was saying, that partially inspired this list where I'm like, it is a lot of work to put this game back together compared to the base edition, which maybe had no insert whatsoever, but you know, you had a little bit more freedom and flexibility. But Eclipse is to me the pinnacle of how you can do that, like extremely, in some ways overwrought, extremely produced insert that is beautiful, but totally do it in service of function, and I'm all about it. So I think that is our list. This has been so much fun. Jen, do you want to make any plugs for Keymaster games? I mean, you have Parks is out and is a hit. You have Nightfall, which people can get, and it has its own beautiful insert. Anything else going on?
More is on the way from Keymaster in 2021 that I'm really excited about. Not right now, but I guess we will have just wrapped up the Caper Europe Kickstarter when this goes up, and I'm super excited for Caper in 2021. Which will have more delicious, delectable inserts that in Keymaster fashion, and other stuff that we haven't even announced yet. So I'm excited for 2021. I'm excited for summer and spring, and thanks for having me.
Yep. Thanks for coming on the show, and let us know, audience, what are all the inserts that we missed and what are all the problems with the inserts that we listed. We do want to hear it. And if you have any ideas for other top 10s, top 5s, movies, whatever you want to hear about, gaming related or otherwise, that you'd like to see on this channel, that you'd like to see Jennifer come back onto the show to talk about, then let us know. Thanks again, Jennifer.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this video, we have all kinds of other reviews, interviews, and recommendations via writing, podcasts, and video here on our channel and website, cardboardherald.com. Our content is audience supported, so if you want to show your support, please visit our Patreon. Thank you so much for watching. This has been the Cardboard Herald.